Hello, ELIC 30. This is Michael, and we are in How to Be Human, an Autistic Man's Guide to Life by Jory Fleming. Continuing in Chapter 4, we are now on page 78, starting near the bottom of the page where we have the interviewer asking this question or setting up the discussion. Jory does not experience hurt feelings in the traditional way most neurotypical people do. He discusses what happens when other people make cutting or hurtful remarks to him and his responses. Jory: what stops someone with autism like me is stimuli, the number of people, noise, lighting, and so on. But if somebody tries to stop me from doing something by hurting my feelings or making me feel bad, I keep powering through. It's not because I feel those hurts and then ignore them or shunt them away or overcome them. They are just not there. During one class at Oxford, we discussed energy conservation. I made a comment about considering the equity issues of an energy tax because I'm very conscious of how much energy all my medical devices use. And another student responded with a comment that was apparently too dismissive of me for other people in the class. The next week, I got a lot of comments like, "Oh, are you doing okay?" And I had no idea what they were referencing. It never registered with me as a problem. When I was in college, an animal rights guy came up to me and said service dogs are a form of animal cruelty, that my dog shouldn't be a slave to anyone. Something quite insensitive and implying that Daisy's unhappy, and she clearly would be much happier if I left her at home. I was going to talk to him, but he left in a hurry. He wasn't interested in an actual conversation. What I was going to say was, "Oh, that's an incorrect statement. She's happy, and she would be super pissed if I left her at home." I think a lot of people standing around me were horrified at his comments. I just kept walking to class, but to them it looked like I must be really devastated and was running away. But for me, that wasn't the case. To me, it was simply a quick thought. "Oh, that was a very rude thing to say." I wouldn't have even responded to the insult or the derogatory part. It had no effect. It's not because I didn't think it was important, but it wasn't important to me. If that incident with Daisy happened today, I would probably respond, "That's not acceptable to say to someone who is disabled, and while I don't care about it, you should not say that to other people who are not me, but have a service dog. It would probably ruin their week." Especially considering the tone and the manner in which it was delivered, both of which are things that I came to understand later after talking with other people. Because while it may not affect me, I know it could be really shattering for someone else. For me, that shattering never happens, and it never would happen, which sounds really cold, but it's made me realize that the emotional bit that I'm missing is very important to everybody else. I've had instances where friends have said to me, "I'm so sorry such and such happened. Are you feeling okay?" My response is, What are you talking about? I had no idea. I was like, why are you comforting me? I also think people conflate comforting or responding to a bad situation with only providing an emotional response. Sort of a big bear hug is going to fix this. In my case, it's confusing. An emotional response, a physical hug, those types of things are not going to help me. They are simply more unfamiliar things to process. LW. Do you view emotions as a negative or a positive? Jory. There are benefits to not being easily influenced by emotion. I think my life would be horrible if I was able to be wounded by emotion. The fact that people can get backstabbed or have emotional confrontations seems to add a whole new horrible dimension. I don't have to deal with that. I'm just observing it. I wonder if anybody's ever thought, what if emotions were just something you could sample, the way you sample food from the grocery market? I know there are very positive things that can happen with emotion. I'll never know that in the same way. But I'll never be at risk of nefarious things happening to me in the same way that other people are. LW. So, how would you describe your emotional register? Jory. People have said that I don't display emotions the way that other people tend to. For instance, like most other people, I get nervous from public speaking. Not only do people not notice that, they actually think that I'm weirdly calm. When I was preparing for my Rhodes interview, I called the director of the Truman Foundation, who was in my interview for the Truman Scholars, which was the most nerve-wracking thing I had done in my life. I thought I figuratively face-planted in the interview. I told him I was hoping to be less nervous for my Rhodes interview, and what would he recommend? He told me how oddly calm and unflappable I appeared. And that was when I realized, wow, people say I'm a good or a decent public speaker because they can't see what I may actually be feeling or sensing, which is very interesting. I don't display very well, which I find hilarious, because, of course, I have that problem with other people not being able to see what they display, so it gives me some small satisfaction that at least I return the favor. Being beyond nervous, I get frustrated sometimes, but it's a very unemotional emotion. For me, it's an intellectual recognition that something is wrong and I don't know how to fix it. Often, nobody else recognizes it as wrong. The assumption or the activity is not going to be modified to make it comfortable for me. Instead, I have to listen or participate regardless. But I think it is helpful to have somebody to talk to. I appreciate being able to share my frustrations, and I appreciate that Mom is willing to listen to me. I try to do that for other people. In that sense, I enjoy communicating with people about things on my mind or things I'm concerned about. I always try to be aware of and not say anything about identity-related issues. I don't know how to process that kind of information. I consider that ironic to some extent because my position with having autism and other disabilities is at least partly similar to what a minority group might feel when they talk about needing things like safe spaces. Because no human generated space is going to be a safe space for me forever. But this is so complex and nuanced. I know I'd get it wrong, so I tend to not speak about it unless I'm having a one-on-one conversation where I can know there's some trust. And the person will know that whatever I was trying to get across was not meant to harm. LW. Tell me about your frustrations. What frustrates you? Jory. Over the past 2 years, I've studied and learned a lot about climate change from many different perspectives. My own thinking about climate change has become much more nuanced. But as I have spent more and more time studying the issue, it has also left me frustrated. My personal conclusion is that there is some widespread problematic thinking going on, which could benefit from a more autistic approach. For example, imagine a small town by a river. Then somebody comes and opens an industrial plant. They seem quite friendly, but a few years after they arrived, the river turns orange from the pollutants they have dumped into it. All the fish die, and people get sick from the river water. They make the plant change its practices, or pay to clean up the river, or maybe everyone agrees a different type of plant would probably work better. But the central point is that everyone agrees that this harm to the river is ideally not acceptable. I see climate change in an identical way, just the spatial scale and the system complexity are higher. What I struggle with is wondering why people have different responses to climate change than to horrible local pollution. Why does the same logic vanish when we stop discussing a river and start discussing the planet? To my mind, there must be an error in their thinking process. Perhaps they are allowing emotions or rhetoric to corrupt their reasoning. Or perhaps they are thinking linearly and can't make the right connections with their version of thinking beads. I find that frustrating because the way I think results in a different view, and it is difficult for me to understand why there is such a difference, or any difference at all, when the issue is objectively observable to everyone. You would think that the response to dumping pollutants into a fluid would not change arbitrarily based on things like emotion, politics, or money, which from my perspective are not actual objective data points, but rather things that tend to corrupt data. Jory. On a personal level, I got slightly more frustrated in England than I did at the University of South Carolina, but that's usually because something that doesn't frustrate other people frustrates me a lot. When you have too many frustrations stack up, it's just really irritating. I was struck how at Oxford someone will come and speak to a group. They will start off talking about us being future government ministers or business leaders. And that assumption will irritate me. Nobody else will notice. But the fact that the speaker assumed multiple people in the room are going to be running things just because they are here is irritating to me. From my perspective, there's actually no objective reason for this. It's not because of increased knowledge or increased experience or wisdom from simply being here. Instead, it has everything to do with the assumptions that go into having an Oxford degree. Assumptions that everybody thinks are real, but I don't. I recognize the effect of a degree, but I also think if people stopped making a big deal about it, its power would largely vanish. Maybe it's a weird privilege of autism to have things like that be unimportant. I find those assumptions irritating, but I think that's okay as long as I don't spread my irritations to everybody within earshot because I think they need to think the same way. Sometimes people that don't know me particularly well assume I have interests in things based on what I have done, such as because I went to Oxford, they think I might be interested in money or power. And that's not true at all. But if most people asked, I wouldn't even bother sharing my view because I feel like they would be too likely to get the wrong impression of why I think that. For me, Oxford is not about a degree, but about the place, the people, and the journey. The ancient and timeless libraries, quiet walks in the gardens, learning to sing, and Scottish dancing, the people I grew to love in chapel. My experience was so rich. Oxford has a deeper meaning than any credential and represents a time in my life that I'll be forever grateful to have experienced. And we'll stop there.